Hi, welcome to the Woodwind Legacy Series. This is our fourth installment today. And our guest today is a friend and someone who's been a colleague and a mentor as well, who's internationally known and respected by not only flutists, but all wind players, brass players, and even vocalists throughout the world. He's developed quite a reputation, not only as a first-class flute player, virtuoso, but also a virtuoso teacher, a person who's everyone goes to as a sort of a doctor, a fix-it person. And so I'm very happy to spend this afternoon and hope you will enjoy it as well with the great Keith Underwood.
Hi.
Thanks, Keith.
Hi,
Ed. Keith, I wanted to begin our discussion today with a little bit of your history, your biography, because I think it's rather unique and maybe has provided you with a direction that has led you to become sort of an all-purpose flute player and a teacher. Your first teacher was actually a well-regarded doubler of all things, a fellow named Sal Amato from Connecticut, who was considered one of the first great flute doublers, and apparently he played beautiful oboe and very decent clarinet and saxophone as well, recorded extensively in New York. How did you end up studying with a woodwind doubler as your first flute teacher?
He wasn't my first flute teacher, but like I was a very haphazard flute player, shall we say. Until the thing that really got me when I was in high school, the thing that really got me going with the flute, with music, and I had no idea that I would ever wind up being a musician. But the thing that animated me when I was in high school was playing Baroque music or Renaissance music and stuff like that on recorder. And one of my teachers at and then I sort of I started to get into flute because, oh yeah, you can play Baroque music on flute too. My chamber music teacher at neighborhood music school in New Haven, Grace Feldman, who's a great recorder player and viola da gambas, took pity on my flute playing and told me I needed to straighten myself out, and that Sal was the person that would be able to help me. And when I started studying with him, he was so nuts and bolts in his approach. And I would like to say, like for you doubler guys, that the thing about Sal was that Sal was first generation Italian. He actually, like, unlike most doublers, except for present company, maybe. Was that your first instrument, flute?
Oh, this is my last instrument.
Last instrument. See, yeah, most doublers are clarinet players, saxophone players who pick up the flute. Sal was a flute player who picked up clarinet, sax, and oboe, and he wound up playing in the original Tonight Show orchestra with Jack Parr.
Wow. He
played on Sid Caesar's Your Show of Shows. Sure. He played Syrinx on some special with Sid Caesar doing some Dance of the Seven Veils thing. He had all these like cool stories.
Yeah.
But he was a flute player, and his flute teacher. Sal's from Salerno, and his flute teacher was the principal flute of the Salerno Opera Orchestra, whose name was Fernando Sessa. And Sal said that his teacher played like a 6-keyed wooden flute, and certain things that Sal taught me were things that were just, my teacher told me this, and I think that's what got me going was the practicality of his teaching, and also his unbelievably sensitive ear to using things like vibrato. Once I started to hear people like Julius Baker, I realized that things that Sal was teaching me had more to do with, what became Baker's style and Rumpal's style. But Sal taught me, like the first lesson he taught me, he said, basically, you suck. you need to listen to decent music. So he put a Caruso record on a '78 on, and showed me how his sorry, little mic pit stop here. He showed me how Caruso's vibrato, changed with the mood and through the intervals and all that great stuff. So
Wow. So, being introduced to someone like that at a relatively early age, certainly, I'm sure, had a wonderful influence on you. And then,
yeah, he told me specific things, and then I would say that in college, I went to college and I started off like not I played music, I, but I just got better because I was studying with Sal, and then by the end of college, I was thinking like, I think I want to go to a music school or something. And then I was introduced by a pianist friend of mine to Tom Nyfenger, and I studied with. I wasn't. I would say I was still sucked, and I needed to study with somebody who would teach me flute music and more repertoire. So I studied. I wound up, to my great good fortune, studying with Tom Nyfenger for a year, and then I went to Yale Music School, and that's just profound for me. Yeah.
right. Well, let me just interject for a second that I met you at a time when you had perhaps was still studying with Tom or affiliated with him, and I was studying with Tom. And Tom mentioned to me, uh, especially when he got busy, he was teaching at Yale, he was playing in the Y Chamber Symphony, teaching privately as well, and he would get little overwhelmed at times with commitments with rehearsals, concerts, and teaching. And especially when there was something coming up of a more contemporary nature, and he didn't want to do it, and he said, I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to call Keith Underwood. And I said, but the concert's tomorrow. And he said, well, he'll have a rehearsal. He can do it. And
Oh
he would,
boy, don't I know? Yes.
and he would lay all of these late minute calls on you. And
I had late minute calls. Tom related late minute calls a lot, and yeah, he helped me get started in New York. And also, once when I came to New York, I would say I didn't know a lot of things like flute excerpts and stuff like that. I wasn't really thinking of taking flute auditions for orchestras, but as I got to know you know, people that I was freelancing with liked my playing, and then I was just, playing duets with people and stuff, and people would start to ask how I was doing certain things. And so pretty early on when I came to New York, I started having students, and my students were people who I thought, were a lot better flute players than me, but I had something to offer them. So my playing career and my teaching career ran so parallel from a very early point.
age, right.
And then the techniques, I sound like I'm mad scientist sometimes, but the techniques that I developed were just trying to do. People would ask me things, and I would just, by having a dialogue with people who were students of mine, I would wind up coming up with things that I thought helped people. And so that's been just fantastic.
Right, and over the years, you've developed, obviously a great reputation as a teacher, as a problem solver, and you've dealt with probably almost every major principal flute player in this country and many throughout the world.
A lot of them.
Yeah, and yet you've always had time and seem to enjoy working with sort of the non-classical, the non-legit flute player, meaning the doublers, and so many doublers are indebted to you for your work. How did you come about, working with the sort of out-of-the-box flute players, the doublers, the jazz flute players, the non-classical players? How did that evolve?
I don't know. Let's see. Who was the first person the doubler person? Lawrence, maybe? Or
Lawrence
something?
Feldman, maybe?
Yeah.
Could be.
You? I mean, I played sessions with people. I remember, I think I know Lawrence because in the early 80s I was playing Pirates of Penzance on Broadway, and I played on Saturday Night Live with Linda Ronstadt.
Right.
And I think I met Lawrence at Saturday Night Live.
Right.
And then some, I think that was like what that things happen like that.
Right. Right. Well, that's the nature of the music business.
And yeah, and so there was as I, on behalf of you New York doubler people, the thing that's fantastic about these guys that I know from the 1970s and 1980s is that so many doubler people, my generation, I know, are way into flute and way into flute history and flute recordings. And you guys know recordings that no flute player has a depth of historical knowledge of the flute that you guys do. So I rely on
That's
my
fun.
entire collection, which is basically on my iPhone these days, comes from people like Ed and Bob Malik.
Bobby Malik, really.
Yeah, jeez.
He just got tremendous stuff. And
Yeah.
But which brings up the point: how is it different working and teaching doublers than people who are gearing themselves, let's say, to an orchestral career on flute?
Well, with there are doubler issues, definitely, because most doublers are coming at the instrument as adults, and they're trying to figure out how there's nothing in your mouth, and they're trying to figure out. It's sort of like performing without a net or something. So they
Right.
they want to figure out practical ways of making the sound, and like how you hold it. And I basically teach basics to everybody. There isn't any orchestral flute player that I've taught that isn't interested in what I would tell a doubler, like how you hold, or what Tom would say about how to pick the flute up and how to sort of like place it on your chin and stuff. Everybody's interested in that, but there are specific doubler issues, like here's one. Can I just talk
Please.
slight? When you play a flute, I tell people flutes are different from those nasty other instruments because flutes have two embouchure holes. They have the hole between your lips, which is rough, somewhat equivalent to a reed opening, and then they have the hole of the flute.
Right.
And most people, period, all instruments, put the flute on their face, and they have a comfort zone, something like. And their comfort zone works for some notes and not for other notes. And I think some methods say, well, cover the flute the whole a third, and then some people will say, well, certain schools of flute playing cover it more like a half, but the thing about the flute is, and I think for everybody, is that the whole of the flute it's like you have two embouchure holes, and the better you manipulate the whole of the flute, the more options you have as far as tuning and register changes. So like a very simple thing is that if I take my finger and I go like this, the pitch changes all over the place. So if you want to keep from sounding sharp when you get loud, I mean, everybody's dealing with stuff like this. The pitch goes, you do something musical and the pitch goes sharp, and then you try to roll the flute in or something, or change the angle, but and which leads people like, who is it? I think Julius Baker said to me, like clarinet, when we talk about clarinet, he says clarinet is the natural enemy of the flute. because clarinets go flat when you get sharp, when you get loud, sharp when you get soft. Flutes are the opposite. But the fantastic thing about a flute is that if you manipulate, just like my finger, if you manipulate the whole of the flute, you can control the pitch like unbelievably with more stability So you're playing like, and it has this kind of like, changes the depth of the sound, but at the same time, it's like you're not doing like fishing around. Most people are fishing by rolling the flute in and flopping their heads around. And that's a fantastic thing. And most people are going to the high register on flutes just by either pinching their lips. Like, I love this exercise. It's a Moise exercise, you know, like. Most people get thin in the high register, and because they're like biting down, if you manipulate the whole of the flute, you get this like amazingly ringy, cool sound. And you don't, I was going to say, most people either pinch the flute or they just plain old blow harder.
Right.
Like a lot of teachers use the term fast air. You know, your ears. You need faster air. So how do people make air faster? They basically blow harder. But the flute is fantastic because your air should be faster, but that has nothing to do with the quantity of air you're blowing. You could blow a very small amount of air. I'm blowing the same amount of air, but by what I'm doing with my lip, and also preview of 5 minutes from now or something like that, what you do with your tongue in your mouth. People think the tongue is something that you use for tonguing, but the role the tongue has in compressing the air is profound. And I could say that the first lesson I had with Sal, he told me to, you know, I played a Mozart concerto for him, and I played kind of like small sound rolled in, stuff like that. And he said, play me a D, bring your tongue forward. And he said, he said, when you make an embouchure, you have to bring your tongue forward and your lips wrap around your tongue. Huh. That's like this. And that's, my tongue is, there's one thing to talk about forward tonguing, like where you tongue, you know, like Moise would teach like stuff like. But this is really like a forward tongue position. A forward tongue position with the lips interacting with the tongue. Right. And that's just fantastic.
You're right. But, you know, it brings to mind something that actually was taught by Joe Allard.
Yeah, you Joe Allard guys are my best friends because his whole thing was like tongue.
And he called it, or referred to it as French coning, C-O-N-I-N-G.
Oh yeah, man.
Which was positioning the tongue in that way, in shaping the mouth, so that you set up a situation where the air being emitted, in this case to the saxophone or clarinet, would have greater compression because the same amount of air is going through a smaller space.
Right. Yeah.
And then the beautiful thing about that is that you can transfer that same concept vice versa, back and forth to flute.
Yeah.
And it
hard thing for doublers is that a lot of clarinet people, they know about things they call it voicing, or they know about, you know, French U vowels, right. And they, you know, like Joe Allard's kind of like coning thing. But the problem is when you have a mouthpiece stuck in your mouth, the compression is happening vis-a-vis the embouchure, the reed, and the mouthpiece.
Inside the
you
mouth.
Take the mouthpiece away, and then there's this huge gap between, as they say in England, mind the gap. There's this big space between your teeth and your lips, and where your tongue normally sits when you play a reed instrument. Right. And so, like a person who's used to a clarinet is going to generally be like. And they're going to lose.
Right.
I can't tell you how many doublers like they get in shows and things like that, and then they have like they're terrified of like a C above the staff. Forget about like playing Firebird or something
Right,
like
right.
that. Their bread and butter is they're dealing with that, and they don't know they don't have the tongue in the right position. They might have the tongue in the right position for playing a clarinet, but they need to bring that position forward
Well,
and
vis-a-vis the lips.
interacting with the lips.
Yeah.
And then like I'm saying, most doublers don't have like sensitivity to the embouchure hole of the flute. Like manipulating this, they manipulate this and not that. And I taught so many cool people, like what we're talking about. Remember, Sid Cooper was
Sure.
was playing 42nd Street or something like that.
He was the 42nd Street that opened in the 1980s, and for those who may not know, Sid Cooper was the lead alto player for Frank Sinatra for many years, and a wonderful lead alto player and good composer, writer, arranger, very fine woodwind artist.
Yeah, and he took lessons with me when he was 78 or something.
He was definitely in his 70s, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, and because of I think Lawrence
Yeah,
or
'cause
something.
they
like
sat next to each other
He
at the show.
eventually called me up. And he says like he says, these guys they study with you, and he said I'm losing control of my embouchure, and I can't figure out why. So he took lessons with me, and I would say the thing that made the difference to him was telling him to control the lip. I mean, I did breathing things with him, which we can talk about.
Sure.
But as far as a doublery thing, he was like, I have this, there's this Nelson Riddle arrangement of Autumn Leaves. This is one of my favorite things. It's like, talk about excerpts. Jazz guys play, or doubler people play me things that are very refreshing to hear because they're not flute excerpts.
Right.
Like probably the most famous person I ever gave a lesson to was Michael Brecker. Yeah. And I got to hear Michael Brecker excerpts. She says, "What do you want me to play for you?" I said, "Confirmation." So he and I worked on confirmation with like breathing tools and this.
Yeah.
But Sid was playing, some sort of like Autumn Nelson Riddle arrangement for me, and he says, "Like, see, I have to go like." I can't play. Why is that? I said, well, I don't know when you were comfortable, I don't know what you looked like, but there's this thing where let's talk Tom for a second. Tom's big thing was what he called lower placement. He felt that people put flutes up and either applied the flute directly to their lip, or they did this thing that he just hated, which was they put the lip plate directly on the crack in their lips and then rolled it down.
Boy, that was me.
And then they have this like shallow kind of sound. And his whole thing was bringing the flute up from underneath the lip. And like if you get really specific, this is one of the best things in the world. Is like if you get really specific about it, it's like bringing the flute up from underneath the lip, turning it a little too far out, and then settling it back. Right. So as opposed to playing like if I play a scale and I go random apply flute to face below.
Right.
Be Tom Nyfenger student. Unsupervised Keith does things like that.
Right.
Supervised by Tom Nyfenger, I bring the flute up underneath my lip, turn it a little too far out, bring it back slightly. Anything, any tongued passage, like I'll play a flute passage from Phantom of the Opera.
Oh no! Anything but.
Phantom has this. Cracky, like unringy articulation. Do Tom's thing, bring the flute up underneath the lip, turn it slightly too far out, settle it back. And you get this like super cool tonguing. And I didn't change anything about where I'm tonguing or how much air I'm using. It's just like literally. I call this lock and load. And then that's what gives you that ring.
Well,
And
it's sorry for interrupting, but it just seems to me that this encourages the concept that in the flute, both lips must be active. Both lips are part of this embouchure. It's not a one lip. That's just it's not a top lip embouchure only.
Yeah.
And of course, this is very different for doublers who are used to like playing clarinet and saxophone, where basically our lower lip, in fact, both lips are rather
Rolled over.
static. But here we're making use of both lips in a very promising forward positioning.
yeah, yeah, and then part of the thing about the so we were talking about Sid Cooper, who was a doubler that I worked with in the '80s, and he was a person who came to me for this issue because he was losing his high register and he felt like he was too tight and short of breath and all sorts of things. And I showed him that stuff and I said, well, your lip's not changing the coverage of the hole. He says, is it supposed to? And I said, yeah, I think so. You know, it's like if you put the flute a little lower, you get your lip covering more of the hole. Then, and he was so panicky about playing when he first studied with me. And then it was one of the sweetest lessons I ever had. He came to me. I hadn't seen him for like a couple months, and he said, "Hey, today's lesson, I'm just going to show you I can play. I figured it out. You're right, you know." And he was like, "I used to play like this. You told me to play like this." He played this like great scale, and he said, "I couldn't play these." And I got it back. He says, I don't think I ever did. I don't think I ever played like that. I had no idea. And he said, tell people if they're panicking about their playing. I'm 78 years old, and I had no idea that you did that. You did that with a flute, or just one little. Hey, I wanted to say, I brought flutes.
Well, we're going to get
This
into
is the
that.
thing that I'm way into. Right? You want to ask what I'm like these days? Well, I love one-keyed Baroque flutes, but a thing I think that I'm really animated about right now is 18th century flute methods, most famous of which is quants. And then there are other people, Hodeter, Tromlets,
Drouet.
Drouet. Drouet's pretty fantastic. Yeah. Hey, and there's for you flute doubler nerds, there's like this amazing lineage between Drouet, who was like a turn of the century person, 18th to 19th century, who lived in England. I mean, he was Belgian, but his method is pretty fun. Have you ever seen his method?
Yeah, I do.
It's on IMSLP in French, but is it in English translation?
There's in English translation available in hardcover.
Pretty fun in French. It's pretty funny because he's ragging on. He said his family was French, but due to the revolution or something like that, they fled to Belgium. And so, although he's of French ancestry, he's ragging on all the French flute players. And he's saying, "I don't know what's going on in Paris with this tucka stuff. It's just ruining the playing." He says, "By the way, I'm going to stop talking about the flute. I'm just going to say, don't do this, you young flute players." He says, "because it's going to make you sick. It's like it's bad for your throat." And he says, "You have to." He was against double tonguing. He had really beautiful articulation, but he supposedly had, he had his own syllables that he was using. We can talk about that.
Right.
But I just want to say, Drouet had a student whose name was Richard Cart, as in Rudel Cart. Flutes. Actually, his student was Rudel, and then Richard Cart was like Rudel's apprentice, and then Rudel taught Richard Cart, and then Richard Cart studied with Drouet. And then I think Richard Cart was something like Rockstro's teacher. There's like through the 19th century, and then this sort of 19th century way of thinking about the flute sort of took over, which is actually very different from I hang out in the 18th century, and one of the things I hang out with It's the quant section on embouchure. So like Quantz's thing sounds unbelievably like Tom Nyfenger, because he says that he draws a picture of an embouchure hole, and he draws lines through the embouchure hole, and he says when you play ascending and descending, your lower lip has to be active, and it has to be able to cover and uncover the hole, and otherwise you're going to have to blast. You're going to have to blow really hard for high notes and things like that. And I've taught that to so many people. Normal flute players are playing Firebird or Prokofiev Sonata, things with jumps, and they're playing like and pinching, and you say, well, you put the flute up like this, and then you vary the coverage of the hole. Then you don't need to blow hard. Then you get more accurate Prokofiev Sonata instead of playing like. You do that, and I remember teaching this woman who plays principal in one of the orchestras in Korea, and I taught her to do that, and she said, "Oh my God, I went to Juilliard and I never heard about that. Did you invent that technique?" I said, "Yeah, Joachim Quantz seems to have heard about my teaching in 1730, because like that's the best explanation. You see a little bit of that in the Kincaid book, Kincaidiana, like John Krell's book, where he mentions like change the tone color by varying the coverage of the hole. But Quantz is so specific and so amazingly catty for some, an 18th century person saying, I'm going to tell you how to do this, but no, most people don't know how to do this, and they think they need a new flute, and they keep buying new flutes, and it's not the flute. It's like if you change the coverage of the hole, how's this for Tom Nyfenger? One more Tom Nyfenger wonderful thing to do, bending pitches.
Yes.
Which Tom, like maybe the first lesson I had with him, I probably played a crummy Bach sonata for him. Inconsistent tone, and he said, "Well, your tone's really inconsistent." I said, "How do I make it consistent?" He said, "Well, can you do this?" And he played a C. And he bent the C down to an A, and I promptly went. I couldn't bend it down to a C, and he said that's the thing, the placement. You bring it up, you do this. I have an exercise I call Batman. If you bend the pitches and you do, there's a nice video of Denis Boryakov talking about bending pitches. If you look on YouTube, he learned that from William Bennett.
And interestingly enough, the Trevor Y tone book, Tone Production, Volume 1, has that in it as one of the early exercises, and it comes now with a CD where Trevor Y demonstrates that.
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful exercise to do, not only for flute, but also correspondingly for saxophone and clarinet. Joe Allen always talked about
Ray
that.
Still talked about it on oboe.
Right, just to have the flexibility that it allows your,
Heifetz talked about it. Heifetz actually, in a way, you could relate that to what Heifetz. If you've seen that video where Heifetz, they say to him, "How do you play so in tune?" He says, "It's not. I don't play any more in tune than anyone else does. I just recognize when I'm out of tune, and I adjust really quickly." Right. And they slow him down. They show him hitting a note, and then his fingers are constantly in motion. So there's this sort of sliding.
Yeah,
thing.
there's a beautiful DVD that's available. I have it here. That's why it's on my mind right now. Called Heifetz and Piatigorsky, and the first half is devoted to Heifetz, and they slow his technique down to,
Forever.
Incredibly slow, and you see how absolutely direct and how lovely and relaxed and perfect each finger motion is, and
Yeah.
it's like you say it's like butter type
Yeah, yeah.
of thing. It really is, and that
Yeah, and he's going like that. The pitch bending thing, if you do it fairly far, and if you do it without rolling the flute in and out, without so much head motion, you have, it's largely my jaw moving back and forth, and my lip varying the coverage of the hole. Without access to the hole, even if I can move my jaw, but it's not the same thing. I can't. And then just gives you so much, I call it traction. It feels like it just feels like you're completely in contact with the lip plate, and you're completely you're really aware of this thing. So, that's what Quant says. Without the motion of your chin and lips, you can't. Playing flute in tune largely depends on the motion of your chin and lips and your ability to vary the coverage of the embouchure, and that's 17 something or other. And then people like me, hear that they're playing that when they're flat they should support more or something like that, and so they wind up clamping and pushing or pinching their lips. Right. Whereas like if you that's what we can talk about old flutes and things like, but one thing, every flute is out of tune. Old flutes are out of tune in a certain way. New flutes to me are out of tune in another way. But the the flat sharp thing with a flute, that it's going to be flat when you're blowing to when your air is slow, or when you're loud, it's going to tend to be sharp, and that's just no matter what scale you're playing, that's what you're going to be dealing with. But your ability to cover and uncover the whole makes it so that things like this lovely Haynes from 1960 has the famous Haynes high C sharp, the C sharp. I guess that's a sharp note, but if you go like, I actually like the sound of the C sharp. It's one of my favorite notes. Sure. Then things like a middle E, that's a famous flat note. But if you E's and F's, if you back off the hole, it looks in a way like I'm playing everything in the same position. But that's because I'm manipulating this.
Right, and again, those movements are very subtle.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be something that if you were looking head on to Keith playing that you might catch.
Yeah.
So
I used to tell people I had the great privilege for when Julius Baker was alive. I taught so many people that were studying with him who are such great players, and I would say, hey, you're having a lesson with this guy tomorrow. Stand sideways to it. He likes to play. Stand to his side and watch him from the side, because if he's playing for you and you're looking at him directly, you're not going to see much. But if you look at him from the side, you're going to see. Try it. Okay. You're going to see things from the side that you don't see head on.
Right.
And so, like, there's this kind of like front to back thing that you want to do when you're playing, not this sort of vertical thing.
Right. So, if I remember, also when we did some tour in the early '80s, I remember you turning me on to a video where Baker was playing. It was with the Philharmonic, and it had been recorded for CBS, and I think they were doing Don Juan,
Yeah, Don Juan.
Right, and there were some beautiful shots of Baker coming from the side angle,
Yeah.
and we would catch him taking a breath sort of out
Breathing
of
in
the
the
corner.
sides of the mouth, that's another thing.
Right, I mean,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was beautiful.
Yeah, like a lot of people, this is a double E thing. A lot of people, when they set up, they look like, they're looking for the embouchure hole, and they look like, hello. They're trying to find it by like sort of reaching out to it. The flute players who I admire, including Tom Nyfenger, including Julius Baker, including Sal, if you looked at them set breathe, they go from wide to from out to in. And Sal said this fantastic thing, which is like, you could say I'm breathing in the sides of my mouth. You could say that I'm going like, when I'm playing that Bach, you could say I'm doing. You could say that I'm breathing in the side. But you could also say you also use the term like I'm releasing. I'm letting the note go. Or you could use the term I love that Baker used the term retake, like a violinist. Like he would talk about like you're playing a Bach sonata and you go. I'm breathing kind of, but I'm resetting my embouchure. And he used the term retake, which means like if you were playing violin, you go do da dum dum dee da dum dum like that. So it's kind of like a setup of your embouchure. But Sal said that a simple Sal thing, worth its double or weight in gold to me, is Sal said that basically you have embouchure muscles. Like, hey Ed, I know the names of the facial muscles. Do you guys know your facial muscle names?
Well, let's talk a little bit about it. That's also, by the way, up on your website. There's a whole listing on keithflute.com.
I sound like I'm a crazy person, but I'll tell you a pretty cool story.
Yeah.
But this Sal said basically that facial muscle. Like here's a couple of Sal things while I'm thinking about it. Sal said basically facial muscles have like forward muscles that are sort of like O or oo, and they have sideways muscles which are sort of like ah. And he said that correct embouchure involves both sets of muscles, kind of like, it sounds like it's a recipe for being really tense, but it's actually sort of like, it's a setup where they're kind of counterbalancing each other. Right. And he said you always have to go from ah to o, or ah to oo. You go like this. You never go from oo to ah. You never go. He says you can find the oo from the ah, but you can't find the ah from the oo. So like you pay for it if you play like your embouchure feels like really fishy, and you can't put the metal into the sound. Right. If you go from here, you have a much more accurate thing.
Right. And it would also seem to me that by resetting like that, or retaking, as you said, Baker said,
tiring.
That you're releasing the muscles for a second so that they don't ever get too tight or too constrained.
That's right. Like he was saying with Philharmonic videos on YouTube, I'll just say, you can see all these, like Julius Baker playing in an orchestra. I love Shostakovich Fifth from Japan with Bernstein conducting, because you can see a lot of really close shots of him from both the side, and you see like, and you see him from the side, and so you see like, can see that resetting stuff, and you can also see his lip covering, and you can also see his jaw. I love the Danny Kaye concert that has Nutcracker Suite, where he's going like, you can see him from the side playing like. You can see so much of this stuff we're talking about.
I think there's also a video with where he's playing Bach Brandenburg with Glenn Gould.
With Glenn Gould.
It's another wonderful one.
And the Poulenc Sonata and the Jet Whistle from Camera 3 from New York Television.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that again, you were one of the people I think of first who, in New York at least, brought woodwind players' attention to the fact that you can learn so much from looking at videos and people observing people's playing, and you really have created a little niche in that way for people to learn from that. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier in the interview that I love is that Sid Cooper went to see you in his 70s, a well-established player. I mean, his career was made and done, and he was still loving music, and the fact that he was still intrigued to keep learning and to try to find solutions. I think that's a fantastic thing to take away.
What I love about, there are lots of things not to love about a career in music, but what's so fantastic is to meet these people who are animated about music throughout their lives. And I mentioned, like, I knew a bunch of people who knew Frank West, and I forget who I was showing this. It could be Jerry Dodgen, but I forget who I was talking to.
Jerry was very close to Frank.
Yeah, but I know a few people that knew, and they I remember if somebody I was showing that the lip thing, and he said, that's Frank West just said that to me. Frank's 90 some. He was 91. He's 91. And he said, I think I figured it out. It's the lower lip.
Well, that's
so fantastic.
It is, and that's again. I hope for many of the young viewers that they take that and remember that studying doesn't end when you get out of college. A degree doesn't mean it's over.
Tom Nyfenger hated the term. Don't tell people you're taking lessons with me. Tell them you're studying with me, because I don't want anybody to think that I know everything. I want them, I learn from. That's the great thing about the teaching, is that there ain't no Keith without the people that I've been teaching. The interaction that I have with one person at a time makes me things that I am interested in, makes me know what I know. Right. Because like you guys who studied with different great teachers, I find out from teaching brass players about great teachers who's like, for instance, for the last 10 years I've known Jerry Callett, who's a wild man of the trumpet, who lives in Staten Island, who I was led to by people thinking that my techniques to a certain extent resembled what he was talking about with the brass embouchure. And Jerry thinks that people who had longevity in their brass careers, like Louis Armstrong or Harry James, Maynard Ferguson, Maurice Andre, different styles of trumpet, but he says that people who had longevity were compressing the air without smashing their mouthpieces. They were compressing the air between their tongues and their lips. And I learned from Jerry something that I first knew from Tom, because Tom was strangely good at buzzing his lips, and he would do all these like things like play a Telemann Fantasy and buzz his lips in the mouthpiece for the low notes, and then play normal flute on the high notes. And I thought, like, whoa, that is some freaky and I remember once in my lesson with him, I think my woodwind quintet was playing for him, and he said the French horn player was cracking notes. He says, like, hey, you're blowing too hard. You're cracking those notes because you're blowing too hard. Give me that horn. And he took the horn and he put one valve down. And he played these creepy, great harmonics on French horn. And I thought, okay, I got to learn to buzz my lips. And I felt like I was killing my embouchure, so I just attributed it to his like teeth or something like that. And he then when I ran across Jerry Callett and I read Jerry Callett's stuff and then studied with him, Jerry taught me to buzz my lips. So I felt like 10 years ago, somebody gave me an insight into my own teacher's playing, because like, you play like, and you feel swimmy in your sound, but you. I learned how to buzz pitches. I learned how to buzz, you know, range. Smoke in the Water is a good buzzing excerpt for pedal tones. But I felt like when I learned, it just helps your lips interact with your tongue, and the articulation thing I learned from him. I think if I double tongue and stuff like that, it teaches you this interaction between your tongue and your lips, and I think it's much more how Moise is actually playing than what like Marcel Moise says in his books about playing. I, I've had like among the flute community, I've had the honor to teach people to study with Julius. I've had the honor to teach people that study with Marcel Moise, Kincaid. And I said, like, listen, you study with Moise, but the Moise that's telling you this, that's not the same Moise that made that recording. His tongue's in a forward position, but to stick your tongue out of your mouth is not really what I think the actual person is doing. And I just love having those kind of conversations with people, and it's fantastic to see. You can't see in somebody's mouth, although now they have like some things they do with you can. I don't know what you'd see if you took a look inside my mouth but I can tell you what I think I'm doing, and then these things like the A to O thing. Could I just say on behalf of Sal Amato one more Sal thing? We know with the flute, in American flute playing, we know that we use terms like frowning embouchure or relaxed embouchure, or we use forward embouchure, and we use terms like pouting, sometimes or we use terms like smiling embouchure bad, frowning embouchure good. Basically, I just wanted. Sal was he was like smiling. He was kind of like what I talk about with pictures of. I love Rampal's playing. What Rampal's face to me when he's playing. He looks like he's both smiling and frowning. His face has this sort of counterbalanced thing, whereas I think lots of people get into a kind of a swallowed sound when they get too relaxed and too droopy. And I just want to put it where. So that was Sal's thing. It's like this sort of counterbalance stuff was so fantastic. And then he used a word that I'd like to bring back, like frowns and smiles. He used a word that I'd like to bring back into usage, which was he didn't really use the word smile as much as he used the word grin. And Sal would say, firm grin. And he would make this face. As opposed to, and I think that's this. It's not this. This is frowning. This is smiling. Grinning gives you this like beautiful stability to the sound. And I think I know what facial muscles these are because I got into the iPhone apps and things like that give you all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So I could name various facial muscles by flute players. I could say that Jean-Pierre Rampal is a big user of like sort of sneering muscle. Or Tom would call it. He had things that he would tell people to do, like in addition to the sides of the mouth, you sort of show your upper teeth like a rabbit. Kind of like that, and you get this beautiful kind of like open release. And so he calls that in his book, he calls that lip lifts and semi-sneers. And I think that that's like, that's kind of like a rompal muscle. The name of it is levator labii superioris. Sneering, Elvis Presley, sneering muscle. That's like a sneering muscle, not a smiling muscle. There's a muscle that Baker uses a lot where I have a video of him playing the Reinecke Flute Sonata that Tadeo took with Linda Mark, and the camera's like straight on Baker's face, and you can see the muscles in his chin a lot. Like apart from losing the jaw, you see this. Like a Roman emperor kind of. You see the chin a little bit bunched up. Who's that somebody was talking about in Japan? My friend Yuko's boyfriend Kenji was talking about Dexter Gordon, and they were calling it fat lower lip, like the using these muscles in the chin. I think I call that the Julius Baker muscle, because like there's this sort of shelf-like, beautiful shelf-like quality to Baker's playing that's like. Sort of this gushy kind of like thing. That's a muscle named mentalis. Okay, Julius Baker muscle. The grinning muscle, sideways. I call that a Galway muscle. James Galway has like this like very consistent, stable sound. It's almost like a reedy quality. I don't maintain. I like the mix of these. You can sort of season according to taste.
Right.
But it's really good to know about them, because depending on who you're playing with in a freelance situation, you want to match.
Right.
Yeah, you're going to play with some flute play second to some flute player who's playing like like. And you're going to play. You're going to play in thirds with them, and then you sort of know that muscle. You're going to play with somebody else that's playing like. That's using this more. You just get so that you can match people.
So that it gives you a tone color aspect as well as flexibility.
Yeah. Flexibility in tone colors and ability to blend. Sometimes we call things, I love in the New York area, we call things, like with flute sounds, we call things an ooey sound. That sort of Tom Nyfenger, Baker sound that's like. Especially here. That's what the ooey, the New York ooey sound. Somewhat Hubert Law's kind of. Hubert Law's is beautiful, like. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Very like smooth and stuff. And that's this muscle, and kind of like I think Tom talked about, like playing with the inside of the lips. Sometimes I categorize muscles like just like embouchures as, I call them parrot beaks and duck beaks, like a brassier kind of sound. Parrot, duck. It's like a sense of the lips overlapping, and then the lips like coming more even with each other, and then turning inside out. Yeah. And it's this kind of change. Right, that's one parameter of manipulating the sound.